Now let's a little bit more work on our panels, and then we'll duplicate and put them into position. So on the back of each one of these panels, I just want to have a little raised area. And so these little raised areas can be added in different ways depending on the way that you're working with your model. So here, we're not going to be smoothing this. We're going to be leaving it just as a base polygon object, and we'll see kind of what that means as we go through this process. Some of these objects will be smoothed and some of them won't. In this case, we want to have a piece that kind of sticks off the back, but you can see we don't really have any geometry to speak of back here to work from. I mean, we have this whole polygon here, but nothing really else. So you can add this detail in different ways. We could add loops going all the way across in both directions to get that. But here, as we're working with just a polygon shape, we can very simply just take this polygon here, go ahead and just do an extrude, and we won't pull it off the surface. We'll just do an offset. So we'll pull this offset down, and you can see how the corners are now connected in. So we still have quads. And then from here, we can take the transform manipulators and we can change it into whatever size we want. And it's still lying on the surface of this larger polygon. So now with this added, we now have a place that we can pull off this geometry. So we could do an extrude, and this time pull out the thickness of it. Okay. We could also, in order to create a bevel, you can do that in different ways. So in the past, we've taken this line here and beveled it, but we can also just hit G to do another extrude, pull it off, and then we can come in here and just scale it. And that does exactly the same thing. You can see the end result is the same. It adds a little bit of a beveled edge. So there's a lot of different ways that you can achieve the same effect. And so you can just kind of become used to some of those different tools you can use to get and really just kind of concentrate on the idea rather than the tool, and realize that there are different tools, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, to get to the same spot. Okay, so instead of that edge going around, we now have a sort of bevel there. All right. So that allows us to build that off there. So once we've got this, you can see that we have a lot of these little actions that we've done. We've extruded and all this. This is the history of the object. So I'm going to go ahead and just to clean things up, delete our history. Once we're done with the modeling, we don't need to go back in and modify any of these nodes. We'll go ahead and delete by type history. And then the base as well, we've transformed it in different ways from scale to translate. So let's go ahead and freeze those transformations as well, just kind of clean things up. We'll go into our outliner, and we've got the panel grouped. So we have the panel base underneath, and then we have the cell groups. If we want to freeze those transformations, we can too. So once we've got this panel, we can begin to create the other one. So we're only going to have 3 panels on this one. So instead of using duplicate special, we'll just go ahead and do it traditionally. So we'll go ahead, just hit Control D to duplicate, hit W, and we can start to move this across. And I'll just give ourselves a little bit of room right in here. Okay. Now, if you want it like this, where it's just mirrored over or actually moved over, that's fine. You can do it that way. What we can also do is mirror this or reverse it. And one of the ways that we can do it is just to do a negative scale. So if we take this and scale it down to 0, you can see it goes down to nothing. But if we keep going, it kind of reverses or mirrors itself. And you can see the scale reflected here. If we just go ahead and set this to -1, you can see we sort of get a mirror image of this. And so if you would rather set it up like that, you can do that. I think I'm going to go ahead and just tile them like this though. And then we'll create this middle one, Control D to duplicate, and move it over. But again, if you want to, you can use a negative scale to create a mirrored kind of effect. Now, we've got these panels. We want to sort of rotate them a little bit to make a sort of a U shape. Now right now, if we rotate it, it'll kind of rotate from the middle, which is not that bad. We could just rotate it here and then sort of move it up. But let's say we want to have a little bit more control over this. We can move the pivot. So let's come into this front view. I'm going to go ahead, and I'm just hitting the up arrow. If I select one of these, I can hit the up arrow to go eventually to the top level. And you can see here where the pivot is located. All we have to do is we can do a couple things. We can hit Insert on our PC keyboard. We can hold down the D key and just move our pivot point over here. And I'll release that. So now when we go to rotate, it's actually rotating from that new pivot point. And so I can actually just rotate it up like this. We can do the same thing with this one. So just hitting the up arrow, coming back to this view. I'm just going to hold down the D key to move my pivot over. And then we can rotate that up a little bit, just like that. Okay, so that pivot allows you to kind of rotate it from that spot. Then that way you don't have to rotate it and then move it again, because this edge where this hinge would be is always there. Okay, if you wanted to create a piece of hinge geometry, you could create kind of a long cylinder there. If you wanted to do that, where you could come in and let's just do that. So we'll go create a cylinder. Let's rotate it down 90 degrees. Okay, and I'm just going to very simply scale it down, and then I'll scale it way up in the Y, and it doesn't have to go the whole distance. And I want to make it pretty small, just so that these pieces aren't sort of floating. Kind of bring this down here. And it's okay, that can penetrate in, that's fine. We'll duplicate this, Control D, and let's move it across to the other side. Just so we have something in there that kind of looks like it's filled in. So now again, we're starting to build from small to larger groupings. And so we can come into our outliner now. We've got all three of these panels plus our hinges. We can select all of those, group them together, and we can just call this large panel group, something like that. And now we can manipulate this whole thing as one object. So we can go ahead and kind of bring it up. Let's kind of move it up here. And let's rotate it a little bit. So maybe something like that. We can always go back. We'll leave those transforms there, but we can always go back and change those. But now we're starting to get things coming together just by working from our smaller pieces up to our larger pieces. So in the next lesson, let's go ahead and begin to build sort of a base for our stand, and then we'll eventually be able to kind of connect everything together. So let's go ahead and take a look at that in the next lesson.